How's it going, everyone? This is Jason Dixon of the Ultimate Gaming Room logging on. And I hope everyone had a good New Year so far. It's been about 4 days, so... Anyway, I'm going to start out my new year on my Ultimate Gaming Room with the Atari 2600 Plus console that I just got for Christmas. So, please do enjoy. Going over to the other camera. This is the Atari 2600 Plus. And this is what I call a redefined classic at its finest. Now, to be on a level, even though I said I'm done collecting retro game consoles, well, the old hardware that is, but when it comes to redefining the retro consoles like this, it's totally worth getting into, since they work on modern televisions. And to be honest, I never expect something like this to happen, where they bring back a console where they play an updated cartridges or the old cartridges. What's even more interesting about this Atari 2600 Plus, you get to play the future 8-bit Atari 7800 games, which is pretty awesome. Too bad they don't work with 5200 games since they're different cartridge formats. Now, my video game journey started in 1989 on the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System, and I never did own an Atari 2600. I didn't get around to playing any of the Atari 2600 games until the Atari Anthology compilation that was released on the original Xbox and PlayStation 2 in 2004, which is an awesome compilation, by the way. And I also learned more about the Atari 2600 within the next few years from there, from fellow YouTubers like the Angry Video Game Nerd and the Irate Gamer. Now, I didn't get my start into collecting Atari 2600 games. That was until, well, first of all, I actually got a cartridge for the Atari 2600, but I didn't have a console at the time. I got the Haunted House game because I wanted to do a review on it, and I actually did a review off the emulator when I used to be the Ultramaniac Gamer, which I'm going to be revisiting one day. But I didn't really start on the collection or get a console until I believe it was 2018. Well, it was actually a third-party clone console from Hyperkin called the Retron 77, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I never started a collection of Atari 2600 cartridges. All I did was bought a bundle of games from eBay, just for starters. Now let's get more into talking about the Atari 2600 Plus console itself, and do as much comparison with the original hardware as I possibly can, since I don't have the original hardware itself. The Atari 2600 console always did look like a spaceship of any kind, which is what I really like about this thing. And, it's made out of plastic and wood, which was actually the wood age. That's how a video game console started out, is in the wood age. And the Atari 2600 is not the first video game console either. Before that, back in 1972, there was the Odyssey from Magnavox, even though that's a different story. But the Atari 2600 console was totally one of the first that revolutionized cartridges for a home console. Atari 2600 was also known as Atari 2600 VCS, which VCS stands for Video Computer System. Atari 2600 released various models of the consoles throughout the years. There was even a special edition Darth Vader one, which is all black. Looked pretty awesome too. Plus there was also consoles that weren't done by Atari but still play Atari games, but they're done by Sears, since they actually had a partnership. And the last of the original Atari 2600s was the Atari 2600 Junior, which was released in 1986. The Atari 2600 did have a 15-year lifespan, though it wasn't much the same after the video game crash in 1983, when Nintendo and Sega rise video games from the ashes into a new 8-bit glory. Even though Atari 2600 was slowly declining due to the popularity of 8-bit gaming that the competitors had, that didn't stop them from making an attempt at an 8-bit console, which was the Atari 7800. Now, I haven't had hardly any experience with the 7800, but I do know one thing, that the 7800 can keep up with Nintendo's NES or Sega's Sega Master System. So the 7800 pretty much fell in third place between the three. So the 7800 had a 5-year lifespan, which was a shame that it didn't get much recognition as the 2600 did, but at least it was a big improvement over the 5200. And the plus side is, this Atari 2600 Plus can play 7800 games, and it has the same controller inputs as the Atari 7800, as well as the Sega Genesis, so you can play Sega Genesis controllers on the Atari 2600. That was always a plus. Hopefully I'll get around to getting some 7800 cartridges for the Atari Plus. And also I can play some of the 7800 games off the 50th anniversary compilation, which is also an awesome compilation, by the way. And of course, after the Atari 7800, there were two other projects that tried to make their attempt to stay in competition with Sega and Nintendo. But of course they failed, and that's where Atari discontinued in the console business, as well as the home computer business. They also did some home computers as well too. But within the 2000s or late zeros, the popularity of retro gaming has risen up, especially for the Atari 2600 catalog. And a lot of things did came around for the Atari 2600. And the latest big one was the Atari 2600 Plus, which was a faithful, true recreation of the original, but built for modern televisions only, with more improved components and higher resolution graphics for HD TVs or 4K TVs. Let's take a closer look at both the front and the back of the Atari 2600 Plus console. It looks like the Atari 2600 Plus console is loosely based off the second model of the original. Yeah, it doesn't have the 3 dip switches in the front. Instead, they have 4. The 2 to the left are the power on and off. The other one is the TV type, color black and white. And the 2 on the right are the game select and the game reset. The 2 that are missing, one from each side, are the difficulty switches for player 1 and player 2. Well, they're not exactly missing, they're just actually put on the back instead of the dip switches. They're just regular switches. Now let's swing this spaceship around and take a look at the back. There's 2 controller inputs, and there's 2 of the difficulty switches I was talking about. There's a USB connector on the back, on the right side, and on the left side there's the resolution switch between 16:9 or 4:3, depending on which resolution you like it at. And in the middle, it's an HDMI cable slot. Now, I can imagine if you're having an old Atari 2600 hardware and hooking it up to an HD TV or a 4K TV, it would be a freaking nightmare, because that was way before coaxo that I started using during my youth on the regular Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. And the console itself is actually smaller than the originals altogether. And that's the box that it came in with. And it came with a cart that had 10 games on it. Get to that soon. Let's take a look at the controller. Looks pretty much like the original controller. It does exactly look like the controller, except it had different components inside of it. And I actually bought an additional joystick since the console only came with 1 joystick, so just in case if I do get 2 players, which I like to have one on hand, even though I already have 2 other controllers from the Retron 77. Here's the paddles. And here's a peripheral for the Atari 2600 that was also re-released, was the paddles, which are two paddles that plug into the player 1 port. You still can play 2 players with the paddles. And it also comes with a cartridge of its own too, where you can select between a few games. Now these paddles I'm actually getting a little used to, because I'm more used to the joystick than the actual paddle, but it's a pretty cool alternative at least. Here's the 2 multi-carts that's redesigned for the Atari 2600 Plus. The one on the left is a 10 games in 1, which came with the Atari 2600 Plus. And the one on the right is the 4-in-1 games that came with the paddles. Now the drawback with the 4-in-1 cart is that you can't use a regular joystick with the 4-in-1 cart games. I'm pretty sure you can use the joystick with individual games if you're playing them. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure you can. But I'll keep it posted if something new comes up. And on front of the game boxes, as well as the labels on the cartridges, it tells you which type of switches to press in order to play that game. And here's the back of both of them. It has 4 switches on each of them. It's like a combination. You just have to have the right combination to play that game. To be on the level, this is more likely a first impression video on the Atari 2600 Plus. I mean, I've been enjoying it ever since I got it. I'm glad I got something like this. This is something I like to have. I like to revisit the old days in high def or 4K. But I don't have many games on it. I haven't really built a huge collection ever since I started 5 years ago with the Retron 77. Which reminds me, I want to talk a little bit about that too. The Retron 77 was released about 5 years ago from Hyperkin. This is a clone console, and the first clone console that ever utilizes Atari 2600 games. And this thing is pretty awesome looking. And there is also a clear version in red, but I prefer this version more, because it has more of an authentic look. This thing also came with 1 controller. It's really odd about this Hyperkin controller. It has a button on the opposite side. I'm not sure what the deal with that is. They also had other controllers with stickers on it. Like this one. I bought this one individually for 2-player purposes. Now I have 4 Atari 2600 controllers altogether. The power button's pretty much like the Atari 2600 dip switches. The rest of them are just on the front are just buttons. There's like a big button for difficulty switches for player 1 and player 2 above the player 1 and 2 controller ports. The controller ports are on the front this time, as well as a save and load, where you can actually like save, where this system where you can actually save and you can load. It's like a save state, load state on emulation pretty much. Let's take a look on the back here. There's an HDMI port. By the way, this is also an HDMI console as well. A USB port on the left, and there's 3 buttons here: a fry button, a toggle between screen resolution button, and a color and black and white button, and a memory card input on the back. On the far right, it's for a micro SD memory card. And the memory card's also the big help for this thing, not only for save and load states, but for firmware updates, as well as adding more ROMs to the game, as well as adding ROMs to the card. Originally it was 15 ROMs, but with a later update you can actually add Atari 2600 emulator to this card, which is known as Stella. That's right, you can add the entire Atari 2600 library to this thing on one micro SD card. If you get the Stella installed on there, you can add as many ROMs as you want, including the hacks and homebrews. That's an awesome thing. But then again, I like to play it the original on modern technology by doing carts as possible. But if you do decide to add the Stella onto the card, if you have it plugged in, I believe that's the only way it affects. If you only have it plugged in, the back switches actually are used for operating the directory or going out or quitting out. So you have to toggle with the settings that are of which those buttons are meant to represent inside the emulator on the console. So that's definitely not a huge deal, but I'm glad there's an alternative way to playing all the Atari 2600 games on the console on a big screen. Well, this is as far as I'm going to go on this project. This is only a first impression after all, but I will be doing some reviews on Atari 2600 games, and as I do reviews on Atari 2600 games, I'll try to keep you posted with console updates as well. And like I said before, I didn't start out with the Atari 2600 when growing up. In fact, I started playing those games the first time in 2004 on the Atari Anthology compilation. Then I learned more about Atari 2600 games from fellow YouTubers like the Angry Video Game Nerd and the Irate Gamer. I didn't start my collection until 5 years ago, like on the Retron 77. And then recently I gotten the Atari 2600 Plus. I'm enjoying the shit out of both of them regardless, so even though I got less games to start out with, there's also an update for the Atari 2600 Plus system where it can fix a few things, but that's only a beta. They don't have a full release yet. But if I do an update on that console or decide to, I'll keep you posted. Or if there's anything new, I'll keep you posted as well. And if there's any Atari 2600 game you want me to get around to reviewing, even if I don't have it, I can try to find it. Please do let me know, and I'll see what I can do. Well, anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, so please do leave a like or a comment and to subscribe to my Ultimate Gamer on YouTube channel or check me out on my WordPress. Till then, this is Dixon of the Ultimate Gamer Room, logging off.